Good morning, everyone. We're just going to take a few minutes to allow more people to come in to the webinar, and we will be starting momentarily. So thank you.
Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning. Good morning.
We'll be getting started in just a moment here.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, I am we are just starting momentarily. We're just moving another one of our panelists into the area of the panel. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning, this vibrant morning of February 17th. We are here today. My name is Andrea Dees, and I serve as Vice Chancellor for Equity and Inclusion here at the Office of Equity and Inclusion at the Minnesota State System Office. And I'm very happy to bring to you this morning an opportunity to hear from some wonderful colleagues of mine, and also the student voice, which is so important on a very important topic that I think has really risen to prominence, particularly in this day and age. We're really going to focus this morning on the concept of the Black Student Union, giving its, what I would call giving its rightful flowers in terms of a foundation for student support, activism, consciousness, and change. And really, this is important for us to be thinking about from the standpoint of where we have come and where we are currently in terms of supporting our student populations, particularly in predominantly white universities and colleges, and where we're going with the concept of the Black Student Union. And so today I'm really excited to talk about the history of Black student unions, the continued and future impacts of BSUs, and so how do we collectively think about supporting the role of BSUs in the context of supporting not just the BSU concept, but in the broader concept of developing student leaders, of also finding safe space, and really developing consciousness. So with that, I am going to quickly walk through and introduce our panelists for today. I'd first like to introduce Dr. Ida Watts, and I want to make a note that we're doing this this webinar in conjunction with Dr. Watts's well-established academic Black Table Talk that she has established over this last year and a half, almost 2 years now, I think. Dr. Watts comes to us from North Hennepin Community College, and she's serving as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and also serves as the Affirmative Action Officer there, and has just an amazing repertoire and perspective to bring around the concept of the Black Student Union. She is the author of How to Be an Ally and Create Inclusion using the ACA Pillars 3-step approach. And she continues to be a great colleague of ours as it relates to really being consultant around the issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and in particularly supporting our student population. So thank you, Ida, for joining us and for continuing to have this partnership between the Office of Equity and Inclusion and North Hennepin College and Academic Black Table Talk. We also have with us today Stephen Parker. Stephen comes to us from Bemidji State University and Northwest Technical College. He is serving as the Campus Diversity Officer and the Title IX Coordinator. But he comes with a wealth of experience because he has spent many years focused on strategically educating and leading efforts towards a more inclusive, equitable, and anti-racist education system. Through person-centered anti-racism multicultural frameworks, Stephen engages in a transdisciplinary practice and scholarship that promotes the dismantling of disparities and white supremacy mentality. So welcome, Stephen. Thank you so much, and we'll be hearing from you shortly. And of course, it's important for us to make sure that as we talk about the Black Student Movement and in its current and future state, we wanted to make sure that we include our students, because while we were once students at one point, once upon a time, the landscape, it has some similarities, but they're very different as well. So joining us from and bringing their perspectives, we have Priscilla Mayoa, who is currently a student studying finance and has had an amazing experience here at Minnesota State. She's currently studying for her accounting degree at Bemidji State University. She was also a student at North Hennepin Community College, where she had the opportunity to develop her leadership skills, and is the former lead director for Lead MN, which is the state student association for our college system. Priscilla has a strong passion for civic engagement because she believes that if everyone is actively engaged and plugged in, we can all create powerful change that benefits everyone. So thank you, Priscilla, for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing from you as well. And last but definitely not least, we have Corey Powell Oliver. And Corey is a graphics communications major and Spanish minor in web design and development at Minnesota State University, Moorhead. He also is a student scholar and a student athlete scholar in track and field, where he has multiple roles running the 100, 200, and 4-person relay. So Corey, it's great to see you. He is currently a junior and he hails from Las Vegas, Nevada. So we are blessed to have you in this very cold tundra. So thank you for coming, for joining us and staying with us and persisting with us. So we are very, very happy to have you here. So I'm going to just kind of open up this conversation, and we are acknowledging that we are in Black History Month, but acknowledging that Black history really should be Black History 365. we still want to highlight and make sure that we note that there are some important concepts and some important perspectives that we bring to the table, and we highlight them in this month of February. We're very thankful for the foundations of Carter G. Woodson, the historian who brings all issues around Black history to the forefront and gives us this perspective and really grounds us here as we think about Black History Month. I also want to acknowledge for purposes of just a couple of logistics before we go forward, that we do have our ASL interpreters who will be switching off about every 20 minutes. So thank you to Holly and Franklin. We appreciate your service. And we also have this webinar in closed captioning as well. And with that, I want to turn it over quickly to Stephen to give us some perspectives around the experiences in your experiences, both maybe as a student, former student a little while ago, that's okay, about the needs and supports of students in the role of the Black Student Union population.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Dees. So you all, good morning, good morning. I'm excited to be with you all today. As we know, it's Black history and Black heritage was just an experience where I grew up, you all, believing that it was my day of birth every day during this day. Or during this month, and that was a reality. And so I'm excited to be doing the work at Bemidji State University and Northwest Technical College. So, as we jump into the perspective, my perspective, as it relates to Black Student Union and other types of minority and marginalized student unions and the needs of these students, and particularly at historically white institutions and predominantly white institutions, right? For me, all of the institutions I attended, they were all historically and predominantly white institutions. These are white spaces. I was a student athlete, like Mr. Corey on the call, right? You began to search for not only leaders in the classroom that look like you, for guidance, for mentorship, for advisement, right? All of these things. But you also begin to look at your peers. You go to the lunchroom, right? You seek out folks who look like you, right? And if you're not so fortunate to be an athlete, where do you find, right, or leverage your identity, your voice, your reality on these predominantly and historically white institutions? So for me, it became athletics, but it is critical and crucial that we have some of these safe spaces within, right, these student unions. Now, we may say, well, what does that do for you? And in my experience as a professional, right, as a scholar, as an administrator, supporting specifically Black Student Union, what I've come to find is that it is a full holistic benefit to the student and whoever interacts with them by having a Black Student Union, right? We're talking about a bio, psycho, socio, cultural, right, well-being of a human, right, of a population when Black student unions exist on specifically historically white campuses and universities, right? It is a thing. It is a thing. It is a health piece to the academic journey. And so for me, that came in the form of, well, we didn't have a Black student union, right? We didn't have that. What we did have is we had athletics. And though that became our Black student union, right? That became where we had some very non-courageous conversations. That's where we had our table talks. That's where we shared, right, our truths from in the classroom and outside of the classroom, in the communities, etc. right? And so I say the needs of supporting our students as it relates to, right, Black student unions is holistic. It's holistic, right? It's holistic. And so, as a practitioner, I really think about not only creating safe spaces, but giving space for voices to be heard, right? For voices to be heard. And I think the unification of particularly Black student unions or Black student associations, however we determine or coin it, right, is imperative. It's crucial to not only enriching the space and conversation around our identities in these spaces, right, but also just loving on the humans and the narratives of their reality, is a piece of it. And so for me, my perspective is, right, it is an essential, it is a co-curricular and sometimes curricular essential to the development of the student and the success of the student, right, as they matriculate through the institution. That's my experience, y'all. That is my experience, not only as a student and gathering around folks that look like me, that love on me, that love on my culture and my identity, right, my narrative, but that's also part of my reality as it is, associated to my professional, my professional portfolio. So I'm excited, and I hope that that gave y'all a brief perspective, right, of the benefit of Black student unions.
Thank you, Stephen. That is really a good point. I really like the fact that you talk about the fact that sometimes the Black Student Union concept can actually happen from an organic standpoint. Whether or not it's institutionalized or not, there's just kind of this perspective that there's a natural tendency for us, I will say, for African and African American students to find each other, to find community. Why do you think that, and that really talks into some of the scholarship that has been written over the years. And I know I'm going to go a little deep with Dr. Watson in a minute, but I wanted to get your perspective about why is it that we, from your perspective, in your scholar practitioner research, why do we see that need for building community? Do we, in this day and age, we're seeing, more brazen attacks, on many students of color. And so, but why is it historically and even in its current state, do we find that, using Dr. Beverly Tatum's statement, why are all the Black students sitting at the same table in the cafeteria? Why is that? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, Andrew, I think that's a phenomenal question. I think that there's many different answers to that question. But for me specifically, when we begin to think about the educational system in the United States, specifically post-secondary education, we get into the Harvard, right? The initial, birthplace of higher education, post-secondary education in the US, as we claim, right? From colonization on. And when we think that through, we then begin to say, well, this was a space that was built to oppress, marginalize and minoritized humans. Like that's the reality of it. Accepting only white males into a space. That means that what is ingrained in the underpinnings, the foundations of these systems of higher education are indeed entangled in whiteness. That's the truth of the matter. And so because of that, when we enter these spaces, we are aware of that, whether it is subconsciously or consciously. We as Black humans are aware that we are not the majority normally in these spaces. And so because of that, attraction matters, because it's a developmental thing that happens for students in first year, second year, through that undergraduate and beyond experience, where you are going to have some very real transformative conversations in classes. You are going to be taught by humans that don't look like you. And because of that, it may cause you to seek out folks who look like you, to have some of those homebound conversations, some of those real conversations, some of those demystified conversations, right? Like we're unmystifying our realities to tell our truths. And so I believe that it's the underpinnings that really, are ingrained in many of our post-secondary education institutions in the United States, right? It's a system of oppression. And when can we speak? And how can we speak? Do we speak freely or don't we, right? But we find it more comfortable, right? When we have like minds, like identities. And that's real in our real, primary, secondary education setting and in our post-secondary education setting. But wait a minute. It's also real in our work lives, in our professional lives. It is real there, where we seek to find community amongst those who identify with us. And that also could include allyship. Let's just say that we should really be clear. Allyship is a piece of that as well. Sometimes when we learn that we have allyship in these predominantly or historically white spaces, it lends a hand to say, I have a safe space to actually hold my truths and state my truths, bring it into the reality, right? And so I think it's a full on, sometimes it is a very explicit reality. Sometimes it's an explicit reality for us. But I think the underpinnings of post-secondary education in the United States are part of the reasons why we attract to humans that are similar to us and find safe spaces within them.
Excellent commentary, Stephen. And you're right. I think that the concept includes the fact that we are not being exclusive, but we're trying to be inclusive as well in thinking about why these exist in kind of a both and perspective when we think about the allyship component. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. I think that's a really good concept for us to think about and to at least touch on and acknowledge. That's a whole nother place to unpack, right, in terms of allyship. But it's really important for us to acknowledge that we're not, there are spaces for us to feel safe, but there's also spaces for us to find community amongst each other. But amongst each other, we're also in a family environment and open to all that can see the opportunities to connect with the African American and African communities. So I think that that's a real good point to bring forth. I want to make a note, and thank you, Stephen, you are right. I was getting ready to talk into the comment that Denise McDowell made in the chat around the fact that Divine Nine chapters provide another opportunity for community and can also express, I just want to read that, and express truth and advocacy for presence on college and university campuses. Very true. There are so many different ways that we can find ourselves in the community. And, I will acknowledge, that the red is not is on purpose that I'm wearing today, even though it's a darker red. Thank you, Delta Sigma Theta sorority. So, and thank you to Dr. Shah for outlining the Divine Nine sororities. Now, granted, those, and I won't get into the specifics of those, but they have very direct connectedness, particularly in areas where we do feel isolated. We find community, we find opportunities for public service. And I think that's another component of this that makes the different types of organizations that surround and build community for our student population so important. And I think there's a good question here for Dr. Parker, and I want to make sure that you catch this because I want to note that you might have to leave a little early. In the chat, how can those of us who are white be good allies?
I think that's a beautiful question, and I think that there's many perspectives to that. Okay, but I think intentionality is an important piece of the work of being an ally. Intentionality. We got to be intentional holistically. Being a minority or a marginalized population in a predominantly white space has symptoms that follow from a biological, a psychological, a sociological, and a cultural framework. Like it has implications on the human body, the marginalized person's body. That's real. And so because of that, being very intentional about how we include, how we show up in the space, remembering that it is a journey, right? It is a journey and there is no real wokeness. Don't try to reach destination. There's a journey to go on and there's mistakes to be had. And when we have those mistakes, we address those mistakes and realize also this piece. You too, as an identified white human, have intersectionalities. Whoa, I said a word. And intersectionalities, we have that. And that means that part of your identity as well is not made up in some, singular one-lane type of approach. You are multifaceted. Pull on some of those pieces of your identity that aligns with marginalized and minoritized folks. If you can, right? We got work to do. And even some of us in the very same community of marginalized and minoritized people, we got work to do. We got work to do to learn about ourselves. And that's also part of the benefit of Black student unions or Black student associations. We begin to learn and conceptualize our realities, who we are, our identities, right? And that's another piece of why they are beneficial. So I say allyship is one of a goal. we all have the capacity to be an ally. Intentionality is where we start. Intentionality is where we start, right? There is no finish, right? But we embrace, we advocate, right? And we create that safe space. Those are components of beginning your journey of an ally.
Excellent, excellent. And Dr. Watts, I'm going to have you chime in just a moment about a lot of these concepts, because I know that you bring a very unique perspective, having studied this work for many years. So I'm excited about that. Any other comments, Stephen, before we let you go? I do want to be thoughtful of your time and want to thank you for stepping in to provide an amazing perspective.
Sure thing, sure thing. Well, I just want to love on y'all and say, listen, is Black History, Black Heritage Experience 365. Chancellor D said it first, right? Love on ourselves, y'all, and perpetuate that love into reality in these educational systems. I personally am proud of all of my minority, but let's put emphasis on my Black brothers and sisters and non-binary humans who are taking the journey of post-secondary education. All right, good luck, and happy Black History and Heritage Experience 2022.
All right, thank you so much, Stephen, thank you for joining us, and we will definitely see you again. We want to move a little bit into a little bit of opportunity for you as our audience to give us some perspective. So we do have a little poll that we're going to allow you to participate in. And I will turn this over to our project director here at Office of Equity and Inclusion, Terrence Robertson, to kind of walk through that.
Sure. So everybody should be able to see on the screen right now. You can use your smartphone and use the QR code to join the poll, or you can go to slido.com and enter that code right there to be able to participate. And the question is, when you think of Black student unions, what word comes to mind? So we'll leave this poll open and let this generate for about a minute or so. So again, you can go to slido.com, or you can use the QR code on your phone.
All right, we're getting some great comments. This is beautiful. Thank you all for participating. I'm seeing really power seems to be coming up as one really strong perspective. Community now really at the center. Necessary, yes. Unity, this is really good. Political organizing, I like that. Safe haven. And some themes off of power, powerful. Yes, this is beautiful. Dynamic, supportive, and asking the question, how can I support? Thank you for bringing that to the table. We like that.
So we've had about half of the folks participate. So again, please, if you can, share your thoughts on what comes to mind for you when you think of Black student unions.
You know, I will just, and while people are continuing to put your thoughts and your words into our word cloud, you know, as I think about the necessary component of the Black Student Union, both from a student perspective and a practitioner, I can recall, you know, coming to Minnesota as a law student. I went to William Mitchell, which is now Mitchell Hamlin College of Law. And I was coming from a historically Black college. And so, you know, I was feeling really pumped up. I mean, at my graduation, it's literally out there somewhere on the on YouTube, because we had President Bush Sr. as our, and so I'm dating myself, yes, I know this, as our speaker. But at that time, what was happening in that time in history was the fact that the 1991 Civil Rights Act addendums were not being passed. And so the reason why my graduation became, kind of hit the news was because I think we staged one of the most interesting and probably longstanding protests I know Hampton's ever seen at the actual graduation, and we acknowledged the presence of the president. We think it was wonderful, but at the same time, we acknowledged the fact that, hey, but you're not taking care of business when it comes to the issues of civil rights. So coming off of that, perspective of having a sense of advocacy and coming into a law school perspective, the first group that actually came and greeted me with open arms was the Black Law Students Association. And so they became a beacon for me in a place where I was going, whoa, I just had a cultural shock in my system, coming from a historically Black college, coming into, at that time, a very Caucasian community that was very welcoming. And I will say that it wasn't. It was very welcoming, but there was something special about having that connector with the Black Law Students Association and seeing how much advocacy they were in the middle of at that time. And I won't get into that. That's a whole nother conversation for another time. But this is beautiful. Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives. Thank you for engaging. And so now we're going to turn into, and we do have the word cloud in case you're interested. It has been downloaded. So thank you, Dr. Shaw. For doing that, and thank you, Terrence, for organizing this. This has been really, really good. So I want to move into kind of a deeper dive around the Black Student Union concept. And so, Ida, I'm going to bring this straight to you and have you just kind of share your perspective, your research about historical origins, the need for and the significance of the Black Student Union concept.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me here today. I am honored, and as my colleagues have said, it is Black History Month every day. So we celebrate that, we honor those that came before us, we stand on many shoulders of the ancestors, meaning that there are those who paved the way for us to be here today. So I gotta honor that. So one of the things that brings me to this conversation is that my research, my dissertation topic, specifically focused on the Black Student Union relationship between the students who participated in the Black Student Union and the achievement of African American students. So I was really interested in zeroing in to see the correlation between the two. So a little bit about the history. The Black Student Union was founded during the 1960s, and that was a time during social and political activism. And the purpose of the Black Student Union was to come together as a gathering place. It was inspired by the Black Power movement, and it promoted racial pride and empowerment and equality. And you might be wondering, why is that significant? Because as a people, Black folks, folks in America of African descent have been denigrated, have been pushed to the side, marginalized. And even as we know historically, education was even something that we weren't allowed to even pursue. It was illegal at a time to even read a book, right? So having that racial pride and that empowerment is an absolute necessity. And we're going to go into that a little bit later. But the Black Student Union, as we know it, helped organize campus protests. And it was in response to the racial climate on campuses, which were absolutely hostile. We know so many, unfortunately, still are to this day. They also protested curricular and cultural exclusions that were present. And we know, again, although there have been changes today, there are many students that can still speak to those types of exclusions. So some of the things very tangibly that Black student unions did is they asked for restructuring of student support services that went beyond racial desegregation. That's absolutely important because when the racial desegregation took place, you know, many folks like to say, okay, we've already offered one solution, that's it. Now you can come to our campuses. But students, particularly those in the Black Student Union, said, wait a minute, hold up. That is not enough. It's not enough to just say, come inside our doors, but we're still going to denigrate you, dismiss you, not care about any cultural significance works that can help empower you. We're not going to talk about Black history as an example. And the students were really a good part of saying, no, that's not enough. The Black Student Union also helped to integrate their campuses and provided connection to culturally relevant interests. So as an example, in Washington, I believe the University of Washington, when the students led protests there, the Black Student Union helped recruit Native American and Latino students from the Yakima Valley and Maca reservations to help diversify their campus. So these students were in the trenches. And also, I have to highlight my alma mater, which is the birthplace of the Black Student Union, San Francisco State University. In 1969, after a 5-month protest, this involved students, this involved faculty, this involved just a bunch of people who were there for the cause. San Francisco State University created the College of Ethnic Studies. That was the birthplace of what we see happening in our campuses throughout the country here today. So we see a lot of tangible successes that have been birthed from the Black Student Union. And we see how the Black Student Union, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, a little bit more with Chancellor Dees, has really served as an effective form of empowerment, cultural enrichment, and necessary activism for changes in our institutions today.
Excellent, excellent commentary, excellent foundation that you're bringing, Dr. Watts. So thank you so much for sharing the insights that you have studied from your scholarship, and also as a practitioner. It sounds that, this is probably one of the areas that really impassioned. I like the fact that you also highlight within the historical perspective, the connection that we have, that all communities, particularly communities of color, communities of indigenous peoples, come together, because at the time and in our current, and we'll start talking about kind of current state in a minute, the fact that we, have some common goals around advocacy, around activism, and how we can, find those commonalities and actually bring forth those spaces, and this also blends in perfectly with the conversation and the concept that we brought up earlier around allyship, that it takes a really big collective in some of these areas. So it's not really about, who's shining or who's outshining who. It's all about the community. It's all about the collective, and it's all about making sure that we are getting to that utopia of what we're calling in Minnesota State Equity 2030. So that I think is something that is really important for us to think about, is that we have always had a shared connection across communities. While we find those opportunities for safe space, we still see the need for us to bring together, particularly as whether they're issue-based or just, quite frankly, dealing with the issues of society ills, right? Particularly in this concept of the post-secondary space, which historically has left us to the side and has never really, we've made some strides, but we still got a long way to go, and I know, Dr. Watts, as we think about why we continue to need this. I'd love to hear your perspective around, what are we seeing in today's culture, in today's spaces at our colleges and universities that is requiring us to need this? Because we get that question quite frankly. I remember a decade ago, folks were talking about that we were post-racial when I was teaching race and law. I was like, really? Let's unpack that, because we had our former president, Barack Obama, in place at that time. But so much has happened over that time that I think has kind of reared its ugly head, for lack of a better term, in terms of how we really see each other within our community. So I'd just like to ask you to kind of dig into kind of what about the today perspective?
So I'll tell you an interesting piece of research that I dived into. Within the last 10 years, maybe 5 years or so, Insight into Higher Education released a report in which I believe it was over 90% of college presidents in the United States, and predominantly white institutions. So let me repeat that number: 90% of college presidents in the United States at post-secondary institutions believed that their institutions were absolutely wonderful when it came to the racial climate. Integration was at its maximum and everything was wonderful. Yes, there's actually a report where presidents have rated that. Also, as you continue to do surveys, you will find research studies indicates that many white identifying students sort of come to the same conclusion. What's interesting in what you're speaking to, Vice Chancellor Dees, is that when you give the same survey to folks of color, to Black folks, to our students of color, they survey quite differently. And I think for many of us, if we are awake, we are not surprised by those numbers, right? So this is why we are in dire need of services of organizations like the Black Student Union and others that celebrate, that help retain, that help motivate our students of color to succeed. So one of the things there are several things I want to highlight here. But as an example, this idea of a post-racialized society, students still experience stereotypes when it comes to being criminalized, right? We've heard so many stories. You can easily YouTube stories of Black students laying down at their lobby or trying to enter their campus residency door and the police coming, right? So this criminalization of Black bodies is still a thing. Students also experience microaggressions, this belief that some folks put on them that they are underserving beneficiaries of education, okay? That they're academically incompetent is another piece that students may feel in their classrooms or in their interactions with fellow students. And this has a great impact on an individual. We're talking about students, but think about this for yourself. If someone keeps telling you through different messages that you can't make it, you're not good enough, and all of that stuff, this is going to impact your motivation, is going to impact your psychology, which Dr. Parker or colleague Parker spoke about earlier. It's going to impact your aspirations and your belief as to whether or not you think you can make it. And it's certainly going to impact your psychological well-being. Additionally, I must note that African-American males who experience discrimination in post-secondary institutions have been shown to have higher rates of academic failure. Why is that? Why is that, right? And the answer is there. The answer is there. Many students still feel to this day that they have to censor our personalities. And it's not just students, it's folks of color across the board, and certainly Black people, right? So Black student unions serve as a community gathering space, a place where students feel connection, a place where they feel understanding, and a place where, if you're familiar with the term, I just want to lay my hair down, kick my feet up. Well, Black student unions are a place, a community space where folks can just let their hair down, be free, and connect in an environment where people will understand them and not be judged. Sometimes I just want to talk about this experience I had without having to explain every single detail, because the person I'm talking to just gets it.
You said it all. I think that the concept of just being unapologetically Black is exactly why these spaces are so important. And I think you are so correct in figuring out how do we, embrace the union concept, not just from an advocacy perspective, but as you're talking about the support perspective as well, not just student to student either, because I think it's important for us to think about how do different people come into these spaces and provide those supports, because we know that it's very difficult. The academic enterprise itself is a very difficult thing to achieve, right? And so if you're not feeling empowered within yourself, or you're not feeling supported, it's highly likely that you're, the retention, the persistence is just not going to be there. And to your point, we're seeing that, we continue to see that those gaps, particularly within our African and African American student populations. I think as you talk about the different subpopulations as it relates to gender, that intersectionality component becomes so critical for us to also think about too, about how to address and have the student come in as they are and be who they need to be, and support them however we can, so that they can speak their piece, they can speak their truth. So thank you so much for sharing that. Anything else that you want to bring forth before I do a little Q&A, and also definitely want to get our students involved in this conversation.
Sure, I will add to that, and we may get into this at the end, but research also indicates that those institutions that invest in programs that target and support African American students, not just African American students, but also support the very specific needs of African American students, have greater graduation rates among those specific groups. So I just want to drop that there, because let's drop the mic and ask ourselves, what are we doing to help support the graduation rates among our different subgroups of students?
I think that's a really good drop the mic moment. And I just want to also add too, that as we think about, the fact that if we can increase the graduation rate, we're also increasing economic mobility across our communities, particularly our communities of color, because we have to think about the fact that, yes, that life cycle of the student doesn't end at commencement. The commencement, really, you think about it, that's the beginning point of their next chapter. And we want to make sure that we got them in that next chapter as well. I continue to want to emphasize that, as we see the graduation rates, let's make sure we're linking that to, and where are they going? Are they finding the space that they want to be in, even if it's a pivot in career, a change in career, or even if it's entrepreneurship, that they're becoming the economically mobile space that they want to be in. So thank you again, Dr. Watts. Amazing insight into the importance holistically of what these spaces bring for our student population. And with that, I want to make sure that we have an opportunity to really hear directly from our student population. So I want to open this up to both Priscilla and Corey to share your perspective on the issues that have been brought up thus far, and anything else that you feel that maybe we old folks just don't know. I always learned so much from my two and I call them semi-adult children. But they have an amazing, every generation brings some amazing insights into this space. And so Priscilla, Corey, please feel free to share your experience and your perspective around supporting the BSU concept and supporting student success. And we can start with Priscilla if you're okay with that.
Sure, thank you. I just really appreciate the conversation that's been had and the history that I'm learning. So I've been taking notes while this is going on. I would say that in terms of BSUs and my relationship and connection to them, I would start off like when I started at North Hennepin. I came in as a PSU student. I didn't know what's going on. And I got introduced to the Office of Equity and Inclusion. And then I met students that were involved in, it wasn't called the BSU then at North Hennepin. It was, there was a different name for it. I think it was like AAS or something like that. But there I found community in how I understood and navigated higher education. Also, just having conversations that were enriching with something that I remember having. And I think also just for me, it functioned as a space to, and I know Dr. Watts said, lay your hair down and, bring it down. But for me, it functioned as a space to engage in intellectual stimulating discussions with people that look like me without feeling like I was being looked down on. And I see that as a very big thing for me because for my kind of person, I enjoy having conversations. I enjoy, increasing my knowledge, learning, but I also don't enjoy being looked down on. And I think that this is like anybody can relate to that. And so having the opportunity to hang out with other Black folks like myself, other students of color like myself, it felt just nice to be able to learn about a topic that I was not always versed in a safe environment. And I didn't always have that in my classroom either, right? I'm coming to college to learn and be better and advance my, skill sets, but I didn't have that comfort in my classrooms. So bringing that to the community that I had found at North Hennepin was essential for me. Like even just so much as finding someone who was in the same class with me and was Black like myself, and we all hung out in the same space and having conversations about what we learned. That I felt, and I don't have any like survey results or like research, but for me, that definitely improved or increased how much I learned about that particular topic or about how I learned about that subject. Now we didn't always have the right information, but that prompted us to like Google it, right? Again, without this judgment, without this like feeling, looked down on, we felt comfortable enough in saying, okay, you're wrong, or I'm wrong, and we're going to look it up to, fix that or to learn better. And so for me, it was just, I feel like I learned a lot and that I was able to, I do credit where I am today and the amount of knowledge that I have and just the skill set that I have to just having that opportunity to relate with other students, other Black students in a BSU format that we had at North Hennepin. And I don't know how, I probably will still like maybe have some of that knowledge, but I don't think I would be where I am today if I didn't have that for sure.
Hey, that's really good perspective. Thank you so much. Corey, good to see you, and we'd love to hear your perspective.
Awesome. That was an amazing story. My experiences with BSUs start a little bit younger when I was in high school. I grew up in inner city Las Vegas in the Black and brown community. So I was always around a sense of, equity, and I've never really been outside of a community where I was different from the people around me. However, when I went to high school, that changed because I got accepted into a magnet school by the name of Advanced Technologies Academy, where ironically is in the same community as mine, but it's the top ranked in the state and does not recruit from my community. It recruits more specifically based on certain academic standards and lottery. So you get a mix of a lot of different people from different communities, um, predominantly Asian communities and suburbia and things of that nature, um, from different academic stances. When I got into this high school, that was around the first time academically I felt out of place, culturally, socially, and it began to show in the way people started to treat me and started to behave around me in certain circumstances because they come from a different environment and don't know how to handle, people who come from a community or ethnic group such as mine. However, the biggest thing mentally for me was the fact that just crossing the street, I now felt the social wall between my cultural experiences in my own community. So that was a big sense of irony that it took me a while to kind of readjust from after I spent 4 years over there. However, they did have a Black Student Union. And I would say a couple years after a couple years throughout school is when it started to get real active. So I became a member, and I remember being a part of an environment where we always communicated, we had each other's back, we could talk about um, specific racial traumas that may have came from home, the community, dealing with, say, police altercations, say, dealing with academics and teachers, things of that nature, which pretty much gave us a sense of more relaxation because it's not bottled up anymore and not considered the norm in my community because a lot of different things within the Black experience are never really talked about. And since they're not really talked about, they're never really resolved. And since they're not resolved, they become bottled up into bigger problems later down the line as we become younger adults and things of that nature. So that was a great perk to it. However, we did a lot of community service. We were really big about putting our face in the community, making sure that we have a presence, making sure that we're on great academic standing and being a great representation for even the Black students that were not in the union, just to really give a great sense of a model and benchmark example of, how we represent and conduct ourselves within this institution and even in the community. So that was a really big thing. And I feel that changed the minds and ideology that people had about Black people within the school because of our representation versus the stereotypes that they were taught within their communities, not dealing with people like us. And I find it ironic because we were put from different groups into one environment and told to figure it out from all different demographics, which left a lot of cultural and social barriers and walls between so many other people. BSU really put a sense of equity back into that conversation within high school, which was a great thing. Um, One of my biggest memories was actually going into my mother's elementary school, Mabel Hogar, right across the street from the school, and us doing like a last minute carnival for the kids and really going out and pretty much giving a great experience to the youth. And for it to come from us, the principal was very impressed and got after I graduated, they got a bigger budget to do more things, and that was great. Um, so that was like my first experience with Black student unions. So I feel like in my community, I made it okay with the BSU. However, when I went to college, that became another conversation, a whole nother demographic. Because as you say, I'm from the desert and I went to the tundra. So it's a whole different conversation now. So yes, I'm a student at Minnesota State now, but it wasn't like that at first. I run track and I originally attended, if you know this university, Jamestown. in the middle of nowhere in North Dakota, basically. And if you know that, then you may know about a lot of different experiences that people of color may have at that university, because they don't necessarily have an infrastructure for any group. And I feel like the gap is wider for different ethnic groups because you get them from different countries, even put them in one geographic area and tell them to pretty much figure it out again, which I've seen the cause and effect of not having an equitable and culturally competent space for these people to be able to be themselves. And I've seen the mental drain. I've seen the negative impacts and the physical impacts that being in an environment like that has had on young adults. And being in that situation really helped me see hands-on what it's like to actually be outside of the box and very disassociated for a long period of time within an administration that not only does not know how to, but is not interested in making it a better experience for the majority of their students. Ironically, the year before I came in, a lot of different people had the same situation. With the school having such a diverse background, the university even lost 50% of their attendees within the first 3 weeks, which was a really big financial gap and dip for the university and had them paying attention after that. However, to prevent like finances and all of the other reasons going into the reasons why I believe BSUs and culturally competent spaces and organizations for people of color are important, I believe to be able to not only prevent the drain and prevent the problems that it may cause, not only for the student, for the institution, but having a space where people can be connected and be the best students and want to stay and have student retention, being part of an environment where, yes, I'm a member of this institution, I want to stay. I don't have thoughts of leaving because I feel comfortable. A lot of universities kind of fail to approach that. And one thing I'm happy about within Minnesota State, where I'm at now, is that we have those equitable resources where they have a department or they have an organization that is literally dedicated to making the experiences of people of color better. Where we have scholarship resource situations for different diverse groups' personal situations. And we have offices where people can talk about this and be able to have their voice heard within administration for different situations to come about when they feel an oppressive situation is coming about. Having that sense of community and having that sense of like welcome really puts in my head that I'm part of an institution where there are people who are dedicated to making me a better person and have the best experience, not just as a student, but on a culturally competent level, which is for people of color just as important. Because if we spend time on campus, and for many people, it doesn't feel like home. And when you're able to create a culturally competent, environment for these people, then it begins to feel like home, and that's the best experience you can provide for people of color within organizations and universities and stuff. So with my long background on it, I have my thoughts on BSUs, and I believe that they're very important and should definitely be considered in every.
Oh, shoot, Corey, we missed
Can you
the
hear me?
last, now we can hear you. Yeah, we missed just
Okay.
that last little nugget of information that you were sharing with us.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I was just saying, as somebody with a big experience with BSUs and different academic experiences and different environments, being able to see the effect on people of color with these programs in set and without these programs in set at certain institutions, I was able to see the effect and I see the importance and value.
Excellent, excellent. Corey and Priscilla, both thank you. Corey, I'm really excited to hear about the longevity of of your connection with the BSU space in your high school, how you have treasured that, and how you kind of made that into kind of an activation for you as you move through now your post-secondary chapter of your life. And so that's really exciting to see the grounding of your lifespan thus far. And we know that you and Priscilla are just going to be some amazing leaders within our communities. But really, I would say, you know, just within those bigger spaces as well. So I do want to touch base on how these spaces have also affected your perception of not just the campus community, but also the bigger community surrounding the campus, because we don't all live in the campus 24/7. We have to venture out. We have to go, you know, go to the grocery store, go to if we want to go, you know, fellowship at a restaurant. Obviously, the pandemic has changed some of that trajectory. But how have these spaces, you know, has there been any connection with community? And you can talk about, you know, community service, but you can also talk about, you know, what are those, how have these spaces really affected you personally, but also just in general, supporting each other within kind of the bigger community structure?
Am I going first or?
Sure, yeah, either one. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, I would say that my experiences with BSUs and the university stance definitely has a big impact in the community too, especially within the environments that our universities are. Like for, let's say, environments like Moorhead, or say even some in North Dakota, like Fargo or Bismarck, or even like St. Cloud, Minnesota, things of that nature. Presence of, Black organizations within the community is really big, even for non-attendees of a college, because they're able to actually see a positive influence of, Black positivity and Black influence within the community. And I believe that that's very powerful too, even for people whose paths and journeys in life are not necessarily driven towards going to college, because that definitely shapes the perspective socially and culturally about the Black people within the community, and that there is a positive image, and that they can get in line with that image as well, if they want to step outside of the box. Because when there's no image, then the stereotypes are always going to flow in, no matter if anybody follows with stereotypes, or if anybody actually caters to the negative image. People can be just as cordial, but if there is no outgoing image, then there won't be any change in the frame of mind of people not like us, or even our own people, especially when they're in an environment where there is no saying or showing otherwise. So I was actually able to see that hands-on, and the Black Student Union at Moorhead is actually very active. They actually get on other universities' cases and within the area, and really ignite a fire within the community to have a sense of advocacy. Even within the non-Black community, it really stirs up a lot of movement within those values.
Great point. I love that. I love that sense of igniting the fire across the community, across university communities. I love that concept. Thank you, Corey. Priscilla.
Yeah, I would say it's slightly different since I come from the 2-year system, as well as like a commuter college. So I've never stayed in the dorm or had that college experience of staying in the dorm. But one thing that I would say from what I've seen is the student advocate or student activist to community organizer pipeline is like a real thing. And I've seen a lot of students that we work together on campus to promote or to advocate for issues on campus go into the community, into their communities, and become part of the communities in fixing the issues that are in the communities. Because I think a lot of us get ignited on campus. I mean, my first awakening happened on a college campus because even though I had grown up in a justice-oriented family that believed in like, you know, you vote, you participate, you do your part in society, I don't think I had enough of that education of like, okay, you actually need to do, you know, some intense work. You have to learn, you have to partner with people, you have to build power, all that stuff. But I learned that by being part of a BSU. I learned that by being part of the diversity and equity initiatives at North Hennepin. I learned that by, you know, working with other clubs and organizations that served other minority students. So by learning that and being activated in that way, I've seen a lot of my peers who have gone on to work for organizations in the community that cater to issues that they care about. And so that's the way I have seen the impact. I know many students that are African students that have gone back to their countries to even take the knowledge that they've learned to go build their communities back in their countries, right? So I've seen a lot of that movement happening. And that for me is, I think, a very profound thing in just that it moves away from academic success into like more like society building. Like how do I take the knowledge I've learned? How do I take the information, like, because college is it's its own society, it's its own small pocket of society in its own way, and you learn that all of these things happen in a college system, and you fight against it, and you have some wins, some losses, you have, you know, some learning experiences, and you say, okay, I'm going to take that because my community is just the same. But before I came to college, I didn't have the tools, or I didn't know that I could be a part of fixing decisions in my community, and so people move into that. And so I think I wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Corey had said about resources. I think it would be important, especially on the 2-year level, if colleges feel like this is an investment in students, like investing in students so that they can go invest in their communities. If colleges feel like they're part of the communities that their colleges are in and they feel a connection to that, I think it's very important for colleges to invest in students that do this work, provide support for them, provide the resources, provide the trainings, even though sometimes, you know, colleges might not like the things that they're advocating for. Like, no college wants to be told that they're racist. No college wants to be told that they're not graduating Black and brown students, you know, at a good level. That's why college presidents will say, oh, everything is rosy. I'm sure they know that's a lie, but they want to present, you know, a front that looks good. And that's the job of a president. But I think if you understand that the students are doing work that's going to have value in the society and see the value that can have in the greater society and the greater community, I would say they should invest in their resources. You don't have to like the advocacy. You don't like to like the way that they protest, the way that they disrupt things, but understanding that the values that students have beyond their academic success, beyond their academic contributions in society, I think it's going to be very, very important moving forward, especially with Equity 2030, to think about how we're investing in students, Black students, you know, it's Black History Month. So I'll specifically say for Black students, investing in them so that then they can have a wider impact on society and their communities after that.
Excellent perspective. Thank you both. And I'm gonna don't go away because I'm gonna come back to you in just a second. But Dr. Watts, I wanted to touch base on a distinctive perspective that Priscilla brought up, and I think this is the unique structure of Minnesota State, because we do serve a variety of students that are coming into our spaces. Some are there 24/7. And others are navigating their lives, you know, finding the opportunity for to attend college, but are not there all the time. So are there some distinctive things that we need to be thinking about as we move forward in continuing to support our students in these different spaces? I know you have worked in both and have had the pleasure of seeing how both work and are unique.
Yes, pleasure. That's an enriching word. I will wear that. So I think, thank you, Priscilla and Corey, for sharing your powerful perspectives. I did work at an institution that sounds a little bit like Corey's experience. It was in the cornfields, and being the only Black administrator and Black employee in the entire institution. And then they had a small population of Black students. One thing I will say about that experience, being from San Francisco myself, it was enlightening. I always learned from every experience, but that taught me that there are still institutions where folks have never interacted with a Black person. There are still people in the United States of America today that's their first time interacting with a person of color or a Black person specifically, maybe in college. And that was a mind-blowing experience for me, again, understanding the cultural background that I came from. So all of that to say, when you mentioned, Andrielle, the experiences that I've had, so both working in urban, diverse environments and also not diverse rural environments, the power and impact of BSUs and very specific organizations that support Black students and support other students of color is so necessary. One thing that many institutions seem to miss the mark on is understanding the significance of cultural capital. Cultural capital, that is an absolute form of wealth in communities of color. Okay, in our communities, having those interactions with peers, those relationships that support that family dynamic, even if it's not blood family, but having those people who sort of have your back, right? Understanding that terminology is so critical when it comes to supporting Black students, whether it's a rural environment or, Priscilla, as you mentioned, a commuter school. I went to a commuter school as well at San Francisco State, but having an institution that gives you teeth, as Corey mentioned, highlights the fact that you belong there, highlights the feelings of being involved, that you matter, will make our students persist. It will help us as higher education institutions retain those students. Because here's an interesting piece, and there's so much to unpack, and I know we don't have much time, but if you were to do a racial analysis of your organization, of our institutions, and you think about what is highlighted to the top as far as priorities, one of those priorities, as is with most institutions, is recruitment. How can we get more seats in the classroom, right? That's what sustains the health of an institution. How many bodies do we have in institutions? Okay, so if recruitment is at the top, when you start doing the sort of racial analysis and support systems in institutions, you have to then start wondering about the retention mechanisms to support those students, and in particular, African-American students, students of color. Often you will find, not always, but often you will find that those retention mechanisms are simply either non-existent or they're just simply not as strong. So then you have to wonder why. In essence, what that means is, as higher post-secondary institutions in the United States, we are committed to bringing students in. We want them to take the loans out. We might get them in the scholarship program or whatever the case may be. But whether or not, and I'm going to keep it real with everyone listening here, okay? This is across the United States. We'll get them in, but whether or not they make it, that's not our problem. Our problem is getting them in. And that's really an opportunity that institutions need to invest in. As much as we're committed to getting seats in classrooms, we have to be committed as post-secondary institutions in the United States that are committed to diversity, so we say, that are committed to justice and equity, we have to be willing to invest the time and resources to fund the programs that have that cultural investment in students of color. If we are not willing to make that commitment, that tangible commitment in funding, again, I will say it, funding, not just words, but funding and resources, which comes with human capital, which comes with the employees to support these programs, as both Priscilla and Corey have mentioned. If we are not willing to do that, then we are just continuing to create an oppressive environment. And I'm going to wrap it up here because I feel like I can preach on this, Andrea, but when it comes to allyship, and this connects to that, if we are not actively doing something to disrupt the system of injustice, which I just mentioned, all institutions are about that recruitment. But if we're not actively doing something to make systemic changes in our investments, then we are upholding inequitable environments. We have to recognize that within ourselves and as institutions. So any and all of us in positions of power, in decision-making roles, and certainly our student activists, we have to do what we can to effectuate change. And that's when it comes to policies, that's when it comes to understanding cultural wealth, the cultural wealth of our communities. We need that.
There were so many like nuggets of just deep information that you were just throwing at us, Dr. Watts. So I appreciate the fact that you're really kind of connecting all of this with kind of the bigger picture about what really needs to happen, about really turning ourselves upside down and really talking about and actually activating ways to really dismantle the systemic structures that racism has kind of, built up over the years, over the centuries when we think about it. So we want to just kind of acknowledge the fact that there is so much that just this space can provide in the bigger picture of the higher education continuum and actually the structures itself. So you have really just laid a beautiful blueprint and a beautiful foundation. And so I really want to say thank you for bringing forth those concepts. And you're right, we could talk for another hour on some of that, those concepts, right? So it's beautiful that you're at least peppering us with those concepts. I do want to make a note real quick about a question that was in our Q&A that I thought was really a good one, and I'll just read it for the good of the conversation here. Our rural Minnesota location just incorporated a BSU in one of our middle schools, which unfortunately has triggered many in our community, sadly. Do you have advice for these students and the administration on how to respond to racist comments in our reaction to our new BSU? So I can start by saying I have actually had that experience in my community a few years ago where there was a BSU started at the high school of which my children attend. And one of them was very, and they were both involved, but very, it did trigger a lot of, I will say just some really ugliness that occurred in our community. And one of the things that occurred as a result of that was the community gathered together to kind of step back and say, hey, this is not who we are. And actually did bring in some workshops and consultants that were able to talk directly with the students about unpacking this. And the students, oh, by the way, were required to attend these workshops. So I think there's something to be said about, quite frankly, making sure that people know that they have to have this education, that they have to understand that this is not about making a person feel bad or feel less than. It's more about expanding the perspective and expanding the mind and turning the corner so that we can lessen the perspective that divides us and really unites us together. And so I was very proud of the district for doing that and doing it right away, not waiting, not thinking about it, not making a big commission. They just did it. So my suggestion is, whatever you all are moving forward to, make sure that the action happens in a timely fashion and in a collective fashion. And I welcome any of my other counterparts here. I see Corey has his hand up, so let me go ahead and turn it over to Corey real quick.
Okay, yeah. What you said was very powerful. I have a similar experience as well, because just last week I went to Horizon Middle School within the community. The city I'm in, the public school system is 40% people of color, yet all white administration, and there's a big gap between the idea of how to, I guess, equitably, pitch the best solutions for almost half of their students and the academic success of them. So last week I went to Horizon Middle School to talk to a good number of the Black students about the importance of a Black student union, about the importance of Black History Month and having cultural pride and being able to stay in tune with that, even in an environment where there's not a lot of us. Being able to talk to those students, definitely, I saw immediately ignite a spark of inspiration and academic drive for a lot of these students, because they immediately met people within the community who were invested in facilitating an environment for them to not only talk about the things that they're going through, but also be able to inspire them to continue to be persistent through the environment that they already are in. Because yes, they may get racial comments, and they do get racial comments on a daily basis. Any positive or negative move is going to be met with some sort of racial comment, especially being who we are in the environment we are. So with that being said, I believe that I had success igniting the administration within bringing in a Black student union within the middle school, so they can be able to vent and also act as sponges towards the students to be able to soak up all of the knowledge to have the solutions necessary to make the best experience for their Black students. So after that, it became a real igniting conversation about positive imaging, about having that ignition started by a Black person within administration. While the rest of the administration can facilitate, a Black person has to conduct it. And we definitely opened up their eyes to like the importance of having cultural role models for diverse groups, especially with them being almost half of their student body population as a city. So with that being said, I feel like we had success. And for the suggestion, I would just say persistence within imaging, and also being able to show them how to interpret those racial comments in in a way that kind of tells them about the reality, but not in a negative way. Tells them about how people may view or see, no matter what you do, how you walk, how you talk, and how you conduct yourself. But also to be able to be inspired to continue to contribute positivity to society, regardless of what other people are saying, and continue to be a role model for those just like you as well.
Corey, you said it all. I think that is a great place for us to close. And I have to say, and I'm sure my partner in crime, Dr. Watts, would agree, having the student voice in on our webinar is probably the best space, because really when you think about BSU, that's what we're talking about here today. So I want to just say a big thank you to, first of all, our participants, our panelists, Stephen Parker. I know you're out there, so thank you so much again for giving us a little bit of wisdom. I want to thank Dr. Watts for giving her perspectives, the background, the detailed analysis, and the just nuggets of just things for us to walk away with as we move forward in our spaces. I also want to thank Corey, as well as Priscilla, for your extremely important insights into the current and the future state of the BSU space. And finally, I want to thank always want to thank my staff that has just we always pull together, and it feels like everybody has had a little bit of part in here, and I will call them out. That Dr. Shaw, Priyank Shah, Terrence Robertson, Terry Hines, Dr. And Desiree Clark and Kaher. Thank you all so much for all that you have done. And again, I want to, as I did at the beginning, I also want to be thoughtful and thankful of our interpreters for coming in today. Thank you to Franklin and Holly for your help in this as well. And so as we end this webinar today, thank you to all that stuck with us. Thank you all that came through. We know there's so much more that we could add to this conversation, and perhaps there'll be a part 2. We don't know yet. We'll see. But wanted to just make sure you're aware of some of our upcoming webinars that are happening with the competency series. We will be talking about cultural framework, awareness framework and training on March 30th. We will be doing an update on the Minnesota State Equity Scorecard that supports our Equity 2030 efforts. And then we also are very, want to make sure that you're aware about the Disability Justice Workshop series that we have been working in conjunction with the NED organization, and as part of our academic and student affairs. We had an amazing opening workshop last month, and there's one coming up next week that will actually talk specifically about the intersectionality around racial justice and disability justice. So please, if you have a chance and have a moment in your day, please continue to come back and get some knowledge. And we appreciate you for joining us this morning. And with that, again, thank you to everybody. Appreciate you all, and have a good rest of your day, and have a good rest of the month. And happy Black History Month, folks. 365. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.